Welcome everyone to USOW's second webinar in our self-managed abortion webinar series, Self-Managed Abortion on Our Own Terms, Communities of Color and Criminalization. My name is Emily Escobar. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Campaigns and Organizing Associate with the United States of Women, and I will be your main facilitator for tonight. Thank you so much for being here today to learn more about the way communities of color are disproportionately impacted by the criminalization of self-managed abortion. If you missed our first webinar, where we covered what self-managed abortion is and its history, science-based facts, the current legal landscape, and resources to help educate your community about self-managed abortion, you can watch the event recording on our YouTube page, and we'll go ahead and drop that link in the chat box for you. As a quick disclaimer, nothing in this webinar is intended to provide advice about the legal risks associated with self-managing abortions. Laws regarding abortion vary widely by state, and some states have laws prohibiting most abortions or prohibiting assisting others in inducing abortions. Now, I'd like to give a thank you to our amplification partners for making sure that this event reached as many people as possible. We could not do this work without you. And as you can see from this beautiful slide with all of the logos, we've brought together incredible organizations from across the movement that are dedicated to advancing reproductive and gender equity to ensure that this event reaches a diverse audience. It will take all of us coming together to achieve true reproductive freedom, and we're so proud to stand with you. I'd also like to thank the rest of the USOW team who is supporting this event behind the scenes. We have Morgan Johnson, Associate Director of Programs, Susanna Berger, Senior Director of Programs and Strategic Engagement, and Mitra Manshuri, who is our Communications Intern. And then, of course, I also want to thank Nat Skinner, our ASL interpreter, who will be providing interpretation for the evening. A special thank you to the team at Abortion on Our Own Terms for providing us with much of the content you'll be learning about today. Abortion on Our Own Terms is a culture and narrative change campaign that aims to normalize self-managed abortion as an option that should be accessible for anyone who chooses it. Abortion on Our Own Terms centers the voices and experiences of people who have and have had abortions and those who face the greatest barriers to care. The Abortion on Our Own Terms Steering Committee includes reproductive justice organizations like URGE, Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity, We Testify, All Above All, and the National Network of Abortion Funds. The campaign has more than 100 organizational partners across the country. So for today's event, we will be discussing barriers that communities of color face when accessing reproductive health care. We'll talk about the criminalization of self-managed abortion, give you an update on the current legal landscape of self-managed abortion, and then we'll end with a volunteer action to help you share resources with your community to avoid this type of criminalization. So we've got an amazing line of speakers for tonight. In addition to myself, you'll be hearing from Dr. April Lockley, who is the Medical Director of the Miscarriage and Abortion Hotline, as well as a physician with Physicians for Reproductive Health, and Gerald Hayes, Senior Movement Building Director at If When How, Lawyering for Reproductive Justice. And then some quick housekeeping notes. Make sure that you direct all questions to the Q&A box, or you can email them at women@civicnation.org. And you can also turn on closed captioning by clicking on the captions icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So before we get into discussing the ways communities of color are disproportionately criminalized for self-managing their abortions, it's important that we discuss the existing barriers that the communities of color face when accessing reproductive health care. So for many, these barriers are the reason why these communities turn to self-managing their abortions in the first place. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. April Lockley, Medical Director of the Miscarriage and Abortion Hotline and physician with Physicians for Reproductive Health. For those of you who don't know, the hotline is a confidential and secure phone and text hotline for people in need of support for self-managed miscarriage or abortion. Dr. Lockley, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. So just to get started, I include pictures here, and I've been doing so lately for my talks because me being a physician is really only a small part of my life. And being a Black woman, a mother, a daughter, a granddaughter is really who I am and what brings me joy. And so here I am with my grandmother. She's actually 105, turning 106 in November, and she's a huge inspiration to me, obviously. And then here I'm with my daughter, who just turned 8 months last week. And then there's a picture of them meeting for the first time together this past May for Mother's Day. And so I just share that, especially in the context of self-managed abortion and communities of color, because it's important to remember that when we talk about statistics and communities of color, it's really not just about numbers, it's about people that are living full and complete lives with families and hopes and dreams and futures. So just wanted to give that personal touch. And so I'm going to talk about barriers that people of color face in accessing care. In particular, I'm going to talk about barriers that Black people face because, communities of color are not a monolith, and even people within one race and ethnicity are not a monolith. But due to the racist history of this country, Black people often face particular challenges, and no one will have true reproductive freedom until Black people are afforded that freedom. So I did want to begin with some statistics and look at some states and their racial makeup. And so let's look at Mississippi, for example. In Mississippi, 37% of the population is Black. In Georgia, 33% of the population is Black. And you compare that to a state like New York, in which approximately 17% of the population is Black. And then let's look at the states that have the highest percentage of Black people. Those states include Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, Georgia, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. And of those 10 states with the highest proportion of Black people, 4 of those states have an outright abortion ban currently. Those are Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Then Georgia has a 6-week ban. North Carolina has a 15-week ban, and the South Carolina government has passed a 6-week ban that's pending if it's going to go in effect. So that shows you that obviously abortion bans are horrific and racist and lead to care that's unavailable. But even if care is available, it can be inaccessible and unacceptable for our communities. And so it can be inaccessible because people face lack of protections such as, paid sick time, childcare that's affordable. And so those facing these barriers are more likely to be Black people who are more likely to be working in lower paid jobs without these protections. And in addition, care can be unacceptable because care can be biased and not culturally competent. And so there are no exact statistics of how many abortion providers that are in this country, but we do know that in the US, only 3% of physicians are Black women. And so most Black people who receive care are not receiving care from people and providers that look like them. And anecdotally, just about every session I have where I'm providing abortion care, a Black patient will say to me, "I'm so happy that you are part of my healthcare team. You made me feel so comfortable today." And that happens on a weekly basis. And some studies have even shown that when Black people have Black healthcare providers, their health outcomes are better. And there was a recent study from Penn Medicine a couple of years ago that showed that patients also prefer their healthcare providers to share their race and ethnicity. So overall, it just shows that when care is available, it can be inaccessible or unacceptable, leading to further barriers for Black communities. And then one other point I wanted to make is to talk about poverty. So in 2021, the US Census Bureau, their poverty threshold for a family with 2 adults and 1 child was $21,811. That's not very much money. And in 2021, approximately 20% of Black people in the US were living below the poverty line. Compare that to 8% of white people and 8% of Asian people. And since the number is so low, even if you're making $25,000, you're technically not below the poverty line, but that's obviously a very low income to raise a family on. And so we do know that people who have abortions are more likely to already have children, and they're more likely to be in poverty. And studies have also shown that people who are denied an abortion are more likely to remain in poverty in the years following that abortion denial. And so organizations like Pregnancy Justice and Islin Howe, who's here with us today, have done a lot of research on cases in which people have been criminalized for their pregnancy outcomes. And the vast majority of those people who faced pregnancy-related criminalization have been poor and disproportionately people of color. So I'm not going to go into too much detail since we have Gerald here to speak with us more about that, about criminalization, but it's always on top of my mind because as a healthcare provider, we're often the catalyst that causes people to face agents of the state. That can be through doctors, nurses, or social workers turning people in. And so it's no wonder that for people of color, especially Black people in all states, not just states with abortion bans, people have a right to be wary of the healthcare system, in particular when one is pregnant and trying to access care, whether that be prenatal care or abortion care. And so to recap, what I just kind of summarized is that people of color, in particular Black people, we face higher levels of poverty. We are more often located in states that have some of the harshest abortion restrictions. We often interact with a healthcare system that's biased and doesn't have providers that look like us. And then we're more likely to be criminalized for our pregnancy outcomes. And so those statistics, they may seem bleak. People have been and will continue to care for themselves in their own communities. So that's the positive side, and that's where self-managing and abortion comes in. And so like I mentioned, when I started, we're more than just statistics. We're people with families, hopes, and dreams, and we deserve reproductive freedom. And so although researchers and providers are more recently using the term self-managed abortion, people have really been taking care of themselves and their own reproductive healthcare needs since the beginning of time. And I also wanted to acknowledge that although the rest of my talk, I'm going to be talking about self-managing abortions with pills, there are other safe methods to self-manage an abortion that are used here and in around the world. So it's not just with pills. And so with that being said, as was mentioned earlier, I am a part of the Miscarriage and Abortion Hotline, and I would like to share with you how we talk with people and support people on a daily basis who are self-managing their abortions. So as was mentioned, the M&A hotline is an anonymous hotline that's staffed by volunteer clinicians. We provide medical information and support to people who are self-managing their abortions 365 days a year. The hotline itself was founded in 2019 by two primary care clinicians, and I've had the privilege of being the medical director since early 2021. And so to give a little context and history, it was founded because we knew that people had been, like I mentioned, taking care of themselves in their own community through self-managing. But under the Trump administration, there were more concerns that people were seeking unnecessary medical care while self-managing, and that criminalization might be more of a concern, as it was clear that abortion access was going to become worse than it already was. And so while self-managing with pills is medically safe, oftentimes people have questions about what's happening to their body and what they're experiencing, and might unnecessarily end up in the emergency department, where they can unfortunately face risk of interacting with the police or other agents of the state, like I mentioned earlier. And this is especially true for Black people, other people of color, other targeted and vulnerable groups like young people, LGBTQ persons, undocumented persons. And so the hotline is just an example of a harm reduction model to help keep people safe and out of situations that might harm them. So when the hotline started in 2019, we started with about 11 volunteer doctors that were covering 12-hour shifts during the day. Sometimes we would only receive 1 to 2 calls per day. And then we saw an uptick in calls and texts, one during the pandemic, then when SB 8 was passed in Texas, a lot of people called us saying, I'm from Texas and I can't get care. And then obviously we've seen a huge uptick since the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And so now we're currently at approximately 70 volunteer clinicians That includes physicians, midwives, nurse practitioners, and physician's assistants. We cover 18 hours per day, so we're available from 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We can respond to calls and texts in both English and Spanish from anyone in the US and its territories. And so at this time, on average, we typically talk to about 50 to 70 people per day, either by phone call. Sometimes those phone calls and texts are very brief. Other times we will spend 30 minutes on the phone or have a text chain with someone for several weeks. And so to go over some of the reasons like why people are calling us, I did want to clarify that we are anonymous, an anonymous hotline as mentioned. And so we don't collect any identifying data. We don't ask people, specifically where they're calling us from unless it's really relevant to the call. And we obviously don't know the race or gender of people who are calling us. However, we do assume that our callers are the general demographic of abortion seekers, especially those in banned states. And oftentimes people do disclose to us that they are in a banned state and due to work or childcare, they don't want to or can't travel. And so with that being said, we have noticed some general themes over the past 3.5 years of why people are contacting us. And so first, people contact us because they just don't know where they can get care or if they have options for care or getting abortion pills in their state. And so we provide people with information about accessing abortion pills in all 50 states and reassure people that they do have options in all states. Then people often contact us once they get the pills to ask clarifying questions or ask how to take the pills because they see a lot of information on the internet and they're not sure who to trust or what to trust. And people often ask us if they need to go to a doctor or hospital while they're taking the pills or during the process. And we really just reassure people that it's a medically safe process and they can check in with us if they have concerns. And then another common question that we get is people asking us if there are any tests in your urine or blood that can be used to detect the medications. And we assure people that there are no routine tests in doctors' offices or hospitals that can be used to detect the medication abortion pills. After that, people often contact us while they're taking the pills and wondering if the side effects that they're having are normal, if the bleeding that they're having is normal, if the diarrhea or nausea they're having is normal. And often people are worried that they messed up the process somehow and that it's not going as expected. And so we just give people a lot of reassurance that everything is working as expected and that we are, again, there to give them information and support if they need it. And although abortion access has always been a problem in this country since the fall of Roe v. Wade, we've seen two big shifts in the calls that we're receiving. One is the fear that people have in discussing their healthcare needs with medical providers. So people are afraid just to go on record with their doctor or healthcare provider that they're pregnant, let alone that they had an abortion, even if they traveled out of state for an abortion, which is obviously 100% legal. And so people will say things like, I can't go to my doctor for a pregnancy test or ultrasound because I'll get in trouble if they find out I had an abortion. And actually just yesterday, this came up. I was talking with someone. They were calling me and they told me they're calling from Texas. We went over some information and based on what I said, they decided that they wanted to go to a local Planned Parenthood in Texas who was still providing gynecological care, although they're not, providing abortions. And so the person asked me if Planned Parenthood was obligated to report their positive pregnancy test to the state and if that could get them in trouble. So people are just absolutely afraid to talk to their doctors about anything in regards to pregnancy. And then the other big shift that I've seen is that people are self-managing further along into their pregnancy. And so medically, abortion pills are typically safe throughout all trimesters of pregnancy, but the risk of criminalization goes up if someone is further along in their pregnancy. And so we do provide medical information and support to people who are self-managing after the first trimester. And then we also let people know about the if, when, how Repro legal helpline, so they can contact them to understand any potential legal risks that they might have based on their situation. And so we often tell people that the pills are medically safe and we're available to provide support, but it's really good to try to understand any potential legal risks. And so people are already anxious enough. And so we like to meet people where they are and give them the medical information and support that they need. But it's important for people to understand the legal risk so they can hopefully minimize any risk. But thankfully, recently in New York and a few other states, there has been what is called shield laws that have been passed. And so these laws are supposed to legally protect providers who are mailing pills. And so currently there's doctors from organizations such as Aid Access and a few other organizations that are mailing pills to all 50 states from within the US. And so that has cut down on wait time for people getting pills. Previously, sometimes people would have to wait 2 to 4 weeks to get pills because they were coming from India. And now people are able to get pills mailed to them in about 3 to 5 days. So hopefully we'll see less people having to self-manage later in pregnancy, since the wait time will go down, but I don't think that will, solve all problems. And so overall, just in summary, my last points, I just wanted to mention that being a volunteer and the medical director of the M&A hotline, it's really just reinforced my understanding that communities can and will take care of themselves and that abortion is safe to self-manage at home. It can be difficult to hear people's stories who share them with us, as obviously some people would prefer in-person care, but logistically it's just impossible. And so they feel forced into taking pills as their only option. So it's always a good reminder that while self-managing is a great option and should be free from stigma and criminalization, as we all know, our communities, especially communities of color, deserve so much more. But as this webinar is representing today, let's keep providing people with information so that they can continue to safely take reproductive health care into their own hands, and we can all achieve reproductive freedom. So thank you for having me, and hopefully we'll have time for questions, and I'll happily answer any questions I can.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lockley, for your insight into the barriers communities of color face when accessing reproductive health care, and for sharing a little bit more about what the M&A hotline does. As we know, these barriers can often lead communities of color to self-manage their abortions. So now let's talk about the data around the criminalization of self-managed abortion. So currently only 2 states, South Carolina and Nevada, criminalize self-managed abortions, yet people continue to be reported to authorities for self-managing even when there are no existing criminalization laws in their state. As we know, the communities who are most likely to self-manage, people of color, immigrants, people living in poverty, and LGBTQ+ communities are at an increased risk for criminalization and surveillance. These communities are already disproportionately targeted by police due to their intersecting marginalized identities. So we wanted to talk about a report, a 2022 report by If, When, How, which was run from 2000 to 2020. So this was before the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So they identified about 61 cases of people criminally investigated or arrested for allegedly ending their own pregnancy or helping someone else do so. These cases occurred across 26 states, the most of which emerged in Texas, followed by Ohio, Arkansas, South Carolina, and Virginia. Among the 61 cases, 89% involved adults and 11% involved minors. The average age among the adult cases is 28 years old, and people of color are disproportionately represented when compared to the larger population, with 44% non-Hispanic whites, 41% minoritized racial and ethnic groups, and 15% not reported. The majority of the adult cases that proceeded through the court, so about 56%, involved people living in poverty. Oftentimes, people who self-manage their abortions are reported to law enforcement by healthcare providers, social workers, or acquaintances, such as friends, parents, or intimate partners. And according to If, When, How's 2022 report, 39% of the cases were reported to law enforcement by healthcare providers and about 6% by social workers. About a quarter of these cases, so around 26%, were reported to law enforcement by acquaintances entrusted with information, such as friends, parents, or intimate partners. And then 18% of cases came to the attention of police by other means. So once law enforcement became involved, the vast majority of adult cases led to an arrest. Of these, 92% proceeded through the criminal court process. 9% of these 43 cases went to trial and ended with a guilty verdict. 44% ended with a guilty plea. 23% were dropped or dismissed by either the prosecutor or the court. And then 17% ended with an other non-standard outcome, such as the charges never moving past the grand jury, the case still pending, or the charges only being dropped after the defendant completed mandatory probation. The investigations and arrests identified were not isolated to states with statutes designed to criminalize self-managed abortion. Instead, prosecutors applied criminal laws meant to address mishandling of human remains, concealment of a birth, practicing medicine without a license, child abuse and assault, and murder, and homicide, to allegations of self-managed abortion. Public records mention that murder or homicide was at least considered by law enforcement in about 43% of all cases. A homicide consideration was 2 times more frequent in cases involving people of color compared to those involving non-Hispanic white individuals. So what are the implications of criminalization? People seeking abortions are simply looking to access healthcare, a right that should be afforded to every individual. By criminalizing self-managed abortion, individuals become vulnerable not just to arrest and prosecution, but they end up facing additional implications due to criminalization. If When How stated that in several cases, people lost custody of their existing children temporarily or permanently. In one case in which local authorities declined to prosecute after acknowledging the self-managed abortion was not unlawful, the woman was still turned over to immigration authorities for deportation. Criminalization also led to people being shamed and ostracized in their communities, including needing to move due to threats at their home or changing their names because they were unable to get or keep jobs. This is why it is so crucial to educate our communities about the safety and effectiveness of self-managed abortion so that we can break down the stigma and misconceptions surrounding this form of abortion care. No one should risk arrest, prosecution, or jail time for self-managing an abortion or assisting others in self-managing. Now, let's look at a few examples of how a person's intersecting identity can make them vulnerable to criminalization and prosecution. I'd like to give a quick reminder that while the people that are presented in these case studies are fictional, they represent the real lived experiences of many people in America. This content may be difficult to listen to, especially if you are part of the communities we'll be discussing. So we encourage you to take a break and step away if you need to. So let's look at our first case study example. This is Jackie. Jackie is a Black cis woman who lives in Alabama, where aiding or abetting an abortion is a crime. Jackie has 1 child. She has Medicaid insurance, but abortion is not covered under Medicaid due to the Hyde Amendment. For those of you who don't know, the Hyde Amendment is a legislative provision barring the use of federal funds to pay for abortion, except to save the life of the pregnant person or if the pregnancy arises from incest or rape. Jackie posts that she is stressed about the pregnancy online. Now, considering these different bullet points, let's think about how Jackie's intersecting identities play a role in her situation. So Jackie faces a few barriers and ways that she could be criminalized, including there is a digital record of her being stressed, which can be used in a case against her. Abortion stigma is high in Alabama, and she could be reported by friends or family. And there is a high likelihood of being reported by healthcare providers if she needs medical care. She may be pushed to self-manage instead of choosing because of cost. Alabama law enforcement has a history of using drug charges to control and punish pregnant people. Over 500 pregnant people have been jailed in the state since 2011. And while not a drug user, her identity as a Black woman makes her statistically more likely to be profiled by law enforcement. And lastly, Jackie may be subject to other surveillance systems because of her income level. So I want to acknowledge that these are just a few barriers that we pointed out, but there might be other ways that you're thinking about that Jackie could be criminalized, or barriers that she faces to accessing reproductive health care. So I encourage you to think about those additional ways. And then we'll go on to our second case study. So our second example is Aiden. Aiden is a non-binary person from the Asian American community. They live in Ohio, where abortion is banned at 22 weeks, and there is a 6-week ban that is held up in the courts. They don't have any children. Aiden works at an Amazon warehouse and doesn't have a car. So let's think about how Aiden's intersecting identities play a role in their situation. So I'll pause so folks can read those different bullet points. And then we'll go on to the next slide. So Aiden faces a couple of barriers and ways they could be criminalized, including Amazon has said it will reimburse employees who travel out of state, but because Aiden is non-binary, their ID doesn't match their employment records, so they can't fly. Aiden is worried about treatment in medical settings because of past discrimination as a non-binary person. And even though there's a 22-week ban, Aiden thinks abortion is illegal in Ohio because the back and forth in the courts around the 6-week ban has caused confusion and misinformation to be spread, which presents a barrier to those that need timely and accurate information. And lastly, they could be reported by a healthcare provider if they need support. Again, I want you to think about what are some additional ways that maybe weren't included in this list that you think Aiden could be criminalized by. And then this is our last case study. So this is Maria. Maria is an undocumented Latinx woman. She is a survivor of interpersonal violence that is currently still living with her abusive partner. She has no children. Maria lives in Oregon, where there are no restrictions of any kind on abortion. She does not have access to a healthcare provider because of her immigration status, and so she uses the emergency room for healthcare. Now, let's think about how Maria's intersecting identities play a role in her situation. So Maria faces a couple of barriers and ways that she could be criminalized, including Maria chooses to self-manage because she's not aware that Oregon covers abortion care for undocumented people. She decides she has to self-manage because of fear that her abuser will find out if she leaves her home to go to a clinic. The doctor, nurse, or social worker at the emergency room reports Maria because she shares that she took pills. None of these people realize that it's not a crime in Oregon, and they report her anyway. They don't know that HIPAA protects her privacy in this circumstance. Her abuser could decide to call the cops on her, putting her immigration status at risk. And finally, Oregon has laws prohibiting local law enforcement from collaborating with ICE. However, if a cop proactively contacts Immigration and Naturalization Services, she may be put into the immigration system. So we just looked at 3 different case study examples and barriers and ways that each of these people could be criminalized for self-managing. So now, what are some key takeaways? So some key learnings that we have is 1, the current legal landscape makes it difficult to access reproductive health care. Marginalized communities, particularly immigrants, low-income people, LGBTQ folks, and others, face added barriers that make it even more difficult to access the care that they need. People may choose to self-manage their abortion if they face barriers to accessing in-clinic care. Digital privacy is important to ensure people are not criminalized for their pregnancy outcomes. And finally, certain communities, immigrants, low-income people, are more likely surveilled by institutions, making them vulnerable to prosecution for their pregnancy outcomes, even in states where there are no criminalization laws. Now we're going to hand it off to our next speaker, Gerald Hayes, Senior Movement Building Director with If, When, How, who will give us an update on the current legal landscape for self-managed abortion in the US and share an update about the case, Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus the FDA, a lawsuit filed by abortion opponents asking the court to order the FDA to rescind the approval of mifepristone. Mifepristone is one of 2 medications most commonly used in medication abortions. Gerald, take it away.
Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Gerald Hayes. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Movement Building Director at If, When, How, Lawyering for Reproductive Justice. And we do a lot of work around the sort of intersection of the law and reproductive health rights and justice, and in particular, the sort of legal risks that come with self-managed abortion. So as you heard from Dr. Lockley earlier, abortion pills and self-managed abortion is really safe. And generally speaking, when people are making the decision to do a self-managed abortion, they're not necessarily taking a health risk, but instead the biggest risk that they're facing is the legal risk. So as was mentioned, right now, there are only 2 states that explicitly criminalize self-managed abortion. Both Nevada and South Carolina have laws explicitly on the books around self-managed abortion. But as was mentioned earlier, with the different criminalizations that have happened, more than 26 states have investigated or arrested people for an alleged self-managed abortion. And prosecutors have used a wide variety of laws, including criminal abortion laws, fetal harm laws, prescription drug laws, and child endangerment laws to prosecute folks who are suspected of self-managed abortion. So even well before the Dobbs decision last year that overturned the Roe versus Wade decision, we saw an increase in the number of states that were utilizing where we had prosecutors who were utilizing different laws to prosecute people based on their pregnancy outcomes. And generally, some of the things that they, are trying to prove in terms of, trying to prosecute people for their pregnancy outcomes included knowledge of the pregnancy, an act or omission to end the pregnancy, ambivalence about the pregnancy, whether that was stated to a family member or in some cases to the medical personnel that somebody is talking to, and the possibility of a live birth. And frequently used evidence in many of these cases included text messages, internet searches, email receipts, social media posts. So some of the concerns that we're looking at in terms of looking at the sort of current legal landscape is the ways that different states may be enacting laws or maybe proposing laws that around these different sources of evidence that can aid prosecutors in being able to manage people or being able to prosecute people because of pregnancy outcome. And so there are some considerations that folks are looking at in terms of how to protect people's privacy, and are there proactive legislations that can go into place to protect people's digital privacy to their healthcare, as well as looking at what advancement in technology can be done to protect people's privacy in their healthcare decisions, and making sure that telemedicine aspects around telemedicine and telehealth are protected. So, and looking at advocating for different proactive legislations, different tactics that the Biden administration can take to affirmatively protect people's privacy. So strengthening the HIPAA laws and making sure that looking at the ways that different states are trying to access information from people who may be crossing into other states to access healthcare, and making sure that states aren't able to access that information, that there are laws that are helping to secure people's healthcare privacy. The biggest change around because of the Dobbs decision in terms of the current landscape continues to be uncertainty. So in the immediate aftermath of the Dobbs decision, there was confusion around what is legal, what is not legal. There's confusion around, when states enact different laws. Many times they are enjoined right away, meaning that there are advocates who challenge those laws in the court of law, and judges will do what's called a stay or issue an injunction, meaning that they're sort of delaying those laws from going into effect. And so what that means is there is a patchwork of access across the country, people not entirely sure what is legal, what is not legal. And one of the intended effects of having this sort of patchwork, of having the decisions around abortion, go back to the states, is that there is a lack of certainty, and there's a chilling effect that is taking place where people aren't sure what their legal rights are, what their legal risks are, especially in accessing self-managed abortion. So just wanted to highlight the work of my colleagues at If, When, How, and particularly our Repro Legal Helpline that was mentioned earlier, reprolegalhelpline.org, or the number is 844-868-2812. And this helpline is staffed by our legal professionals on staff to help people who are considering self-managed abortion, who may be prosecuted or may be criminalized in some ways because or being accused of self-managing their abortion, helping them to mitigate the sort of legal risks that are in place. And so encourage anyone who has legal questions or concerns to utilize our helpline. In addition to the helpline, we also have a legal defense fund to help make sure that people who are prosecuted or are criminalized because of a self-managed abortion, that they are getting the resources that they need. Because we don't think that anyone should be arrested or jailed for ending their own pregnancy, but we know, again, that this is happening in states across the country, and in particular for people where clinic-based abortion is just increasingly out of reach. And so, they have the main resources that are available to them are accessing abortion pills or other methods of self-managed abortion. And then there are, we also want to recognize that for some people, they are pushed into doing a self-managed abortion, but also some people are pulled into doing a self-managed abortion because they simply prefer a private home-based abortion experience. And we know that, there have been at least 18 arrests of people who ended their own pregnancy in their own homes, or folks who were supporting them to do that. And so one of the things that we find to be consistent with many of these cases is that if there is a prosecutor who is seeking to punish someone, they will find a way to do that. And as was mentioned, this has meant, relying on some antiquated laws or laws that were actually meant to protect, not to arrest pregnant people. And, we also acknowledge that someone doesn't necessarily have to go to jail in order for it to do harm, that even misdemeanor charges can mean that a person may lose their job, especially for people who are in low-wage care work like childcare or home medical assistance, that they, even being charged can mean a loss of jobs. And then in many states, there are record searches that are used by employers that will show an arrest and what the arrest was for, even if the person is never formally charged. And so often there's not a way to get this mark off their record. So just acknowledging that even simply being charged with a crime can cause harm to folks. So although, courts have generally sided with people in many of the cases that we have seen, where different types of laws are used mainly by politically motivated prosecutors, that they are wielding against people who end their own pregnancies or those who help them. Courts generally have sided with folks who end their own pregnancies, but it's important to understand, again, how extreme prosecutors are going to attempt to punish people for their abortion and for the results of pregnancy. So sometimes it's somebody who is experiencing a miscarriage, but a healthcare worker or social worker believes that they may have self-managed their abortion, and so they are criminalized even in cases of miscarriage. All right. So right now we don't have new states yet who that are on our radar in terms of enacting new legislation, but we do have a process for, with our policy team looking to repeal, in the places, so the two places that do currently have restrictions in place. We are also looking at reforming for places that have ambiguous laws on the books. So making sure that if there are laws that have been and could potentially be used to prosecute a person, that we're doing what's necessary to kind of reform those laws. And then we're also looking at reinforcement. So looking for statutory frameworks that can protect abortion rights and prohibit any criminal prosecution for abortion, miscarriage, or other pregnancy outcomes. So we're really looking to protect people who self-manage their abortion by ensuring that acts by others that they consent to. So if they are working with others who are assisting in procuring a self-managed abortion, again, making sure that nobody is criminalized for those actions. All right, so that's the sort of overview of the legal landscape. I did want to kind of give a breakdown of the mifepristone case and the implications that it has around people's concern about having access to abortion, to medication abortion. So just to give some background, back in 2000, the Food and Drug Administration, known as the FDA, approved the use of mifepristone to be used as a medication abortion regimen. And in the more than 2 decades since the FDA first approved mifepristone, the agency has evaluated the safety of Miffy at least 4 times, and the results have been overwhelmingly conclusive that mifepristone has been proven to be safe and effective, and has been used by over 5 million women in the United States. And that's the statistic that we have. We know that it's also been used by other non-binary folks. We just don't have accurate data around there, but the data we have is 5.6 million. And that the research has shown that Miffy has fewer serious risks than other over-the-counter medication, including Tylenol. And medication abortion accounts for more than half of all abortions that happen in the US. And we've seen the increase of the frequency of medication abortion being used via telehealth, especially during the pandemic, but also in the wake of the Dobbs decision, where people have less access to providers in their own states and are having to look for getting access to medication abortion from providers in other states. So the case that around Miffy involved a challenge by anti-abortion doctors who they were challenging the FDA's approval of mifepristone. So they are challenging 23 years later the approval of a drug that has been in effect for over 2 decades. And the fact that the FDA has found time and time again that it is a safe, effective, and medically necessary medication still wasn't enough for folks who were trying to use the law in a way to remove access to abortion care. So despite, again, those decades of studies and practice that have confirmed mifepristone efficacy and safety, they still were able to move forward with a challenge that went to, that started at a district court in Texas. And given the judge in this case, it was likely, they did what's called venue shopping to look for a judge who would be kind of an activist judge. And they were able to find Judge Kaczmarek. And so this judge then issued an injunction against the FDA approval. So again, they were challenging an approval that happened 23 years ago. And with this, the intention of imperiling access to the drug for everyone. And so this, for many folks in the legal community, the fact that this case was allowed to move forward is unprecedented, because there are many aspects in this case that there should not have been, this should not have moved forward. It's really unprecedented in the ways that they were able to move forward. So there are a couple of sort of, I'll talk sort of high level about some of the legal implications, and then touch a little bit more on the specific, this is how this case is impactful. So given the standing of the folks who brought this case, this based solely on standing, meaning should somebody be able to bring this case? Are these folks being sufficiently harmed in this case? By general legal standards, they should not have been able to bring this forward. But because of, again, this activist judge, they were able to move forward this case. So on April 7th, Judge Kaczmarek issued this preliminary injunction, essentially saying that the FDA's approval should not be allowed to move forward, putting the access to mifepristone out of reach. On the same day, Judge Rice in Washington State issued a separate injunction to actually do the opposite, which was to direct the Food and Drug Administration to maintain the distribution of Miffy in 16 states and the District of Columbia. And then he also later issued another order that specifically required the FDA to maintain approval no matter what the Texas or the 5th District ruling purported. And then this case, went to the Supreme Court, particularly if you have two opposing judgments that happen, then that is one way that those cases can get to the Supreme Court. And so on April 21st, the Supreme Court issued an injunction, or issued a stay, meaning that they didn't allow the Judge Kaczmarek's injunction to go into effect, meaning that for the time being, mifepristone does remain available. They essentially sent the case back for review by the lower courts. So that's the most recent that has happened is in mid-May, the 5th Circuit held oral arguments in sort of the rehearing of the case. And this is where we are waiting. We are awaiting the decision of the 5th Circuit, which can happen sort of at any time. And just, to reiterate the concern about this case is because this case, there are so many aspects of legal precedent that were ignored or were sort of overturned. It really represents the ways that activist judges can sort of overrule the rule of law. And that's really concerning to a lot of folks who rely on legal precedent to stand and potential thinking about other cases where judges can come in and let longstanding the fact that mifepristone had been considered safe for over 20 years, that is, that's really challenging. And there are a lot of folks who are, paying attention to what happens in this case because it can indicate what can happen in future cases. There were a couple of questions that have come into our helpline as a result. In part, what many of these cases do is to sow concern, people having not having clarity about what is legal and what is not. And so that is, that was one of the concerns is what happens if people don't have access to this particular medication. So some of the questions that came into the helpline was around the being able to use the other regimen, the other pill that is part of medication abortion, misoprostol, which is safe and effective by itself, but there would be more pills that are required and taken regularly over the course of a day than if you have the combination. And if there's still some, concerns about clarity about whether providers are able to just provide miso alone, because it's using it in abortion care is actually an off-label use, and that there were some earlier studies that showed lower effectiveness of miso alone, but subsequent studies have actually shown that miso alone protocols can just take a longer period of time to be effective, but they're still effective. And so, just acknowledging that, that there were still options available, but that we wanted people to have the best options available, and that sometimes not everybody can wait the extra week to find out if their abortion was successful, and that miso is the medication that comes with the side effects that are noted with medication abortion, including nausea, cramping. So there may be some more intense symptoms that were coming with just miso alone. So those are some of the questions that came into our helpline. Again, what are the risks with not having solid legal footing on having access to care is people not knowing what is legal, what is not, and having to, make calculated risks about what they can access when they're trying to access abortion care. I'm sorry, I ran over a little on time, but I will turn it back to Emily.
Thank you so much, Gerald, for that extremely helpful breakdown on the legal landscape of self-managed abortion, as well as an update on the mifepristone case. Now, we'd like to share a few resources communities can turn to avoid criminalization. At the United States of Women, we believe that no one should face criminal charges, incarceration, or any form of punishment for making their own pregnancy decisions, including abortion, or for supporting someone else through that process. There's a ton of things we can do to avoid exposure to criminalization. The first is, and we talked about this with Dr. Lockley, if someone is self-managing an abortion and has questions, they can call the M&A hotline to talk to a doctor by text or phone to keep themselves medically safe, or they can contact ReproCare to get emotional support and information. The ER doesn't have to be the first stop. And then, as Gerald said, the Repro Legal Helpline can help you with legal questions about your rights and risks regarding self-managed abortion and your rights and risks in supporting someone, as well as the Repro Legal Defense Fund, which will help make sure that folks get the legal defense, bail funds, and other support that they need. And then know your local resources. Abortion funds in communities across the country are helping individuals understand the laws and restrictions that may be in place as they're seeking abortion care, as well as providing people with financial support when seeking care. We encourage you to visit USOW's Abortion Access Hub, that's usow.org/repro, to find your local abortion fund. And lastly, share abortion stories. Destigmatizing abortion helps contribute to decriminalization. Connect with We Testify to share your self-managed abortion story. I want to remind folks that there have been questions coming in through the Q&A, and we've been able to answer most of them. So maybe your question was already answered if you want to take a look. And then I am going to see if we have any questions that we can still answer with our speakers while they're still here. Gerald, I'm not sure if you would be able to answer the question, does a charge also endanger one's eligibility for federal housing?
That's a good question. Usually it can vary state by state. I'm not sure actually about federal, if the charge itself is enough to keep someone out, but that is a consideration. We are usually, when we're talking with legal professionals, we encourage them to not just push for folks to take a plea deal, because even sometimes if it's even time served, meaning that they may not have to serve additional jail time, or they may only, sort of be on probation, that can sometimes be enough to trigger people's loss of public benefits, including having access to housing. And so it is something that we sort of want, particularly public defenders or other criminal defense lawyers to take into consideration. As people are seeking, are facing criminalization, that there are other risks beyond just whether somebody goes to jail or not, and that housing is one of the issues. Having access to other public benefits, sometimes even having access to healthcare, having access to other supports may be impacted if they have that sort of criminal charge on their record.
And then we have one more question. So if this person asked, if practical support groups assist patients coming from out of state, can the group be liable legally with some of the new laws red state attorney generals are trying to pass?
So that is a ripe question. Fortunately, we haven't seen it really be tested just yet, in terms of, especially, there is still the Commerce Clause of the Constitution that impacts interstate. So technically, states cannot enact laws that affect interstate travel. That has been designated as the purview of Congress by Supreme Court precedent. But as many of you know, Supreme Court precedent is no longer something that we can rely upon. So, there is the Abortion Defense Network that is a place that people, if they are concerned about or have been, charged, that especially helpers, that they can get legal support. But we haven't necessarily seen anyone be prosecuted for going across state lines. But again, there are many states that are trying to throw whatever they can. They're using the pasta method. They're throwing everything at the wall and seeing what can stick. We've seen several states try to enact legislation that is impacting, whether people are supporting folks crossing state lines. That includes helping young people cross state lines in order to get abortion care. So far, we haven't seen anything, anyone actually be successfully prosecuted for that, but that doesn't mean that folks aren't trying. And that that is definitely, those are the types of laws that we're surveilling and keeping an eye out to see how far they get. So far, all of those types of laws have been sort of shut down by judges, but who knows what could happen if something were to make its way up to the Supreme Court. We know this current makeup of the Supreme Court is very hostile to these types to reproductive rights laws. So who knows what could happen. We don't want to see. We hope it doesn't get to that point. But yeah, it is something to keep an eye on.
Great. Thank you so much, Gerald. And just to make sure that we stay on time, I'm going to go ahead and keep us moving forward. But thank you all for your questions. We'll keep answering as they come in. So now we invite you, our supporters, to help share information with your community to avoid criminalization when self-managing an abortion. So to achieve this goal, we're going to be using a platform called Impactive. Impactive is USOW's digital organizing platform that makes it easier to take action. So we're going to learn how to use the app, how to download the app, get started on the campaign, and share on social media. So make sure that you get your phones out. If you have any questions about Impactive, logging into the app, creating an account, etc., please drop them in our chat box and our team will be happy to help. So what is Impactive? Impactive is a mobile app and web platform we use for actions like this. We love it because you can take multiple actions within the same platform. You can message friends and family to take action around legislation or campaigns. You can fill reports and sync data to help us better understand our reach and impact with these actions. And also you can keep in touch with USOW. For today, we'll be using the tool to share information on social media on how to avoid criminalization of self-managed abortion. So please get your phone ready and follow along. We're going to get through the nitty-gritty part of setting up your account. So you're going to start by searching for the app called Impactive on the App Store or Google Play, and you'll see what that app looks like on the screen. And then you're going to download it onto your phone. So again, that's Impactive both on App Store or Google Play, and you're going to download it onto your phone. Once it's downloaded, you're going to open the app, and then you're going to enter our campaign code 209978. That's 209978. And you're going to create an account with your name, phone number, and email. Once you set up your account, Impactive will send a magic link to your email account. And then you'll be able to click the link and log in from there. And as a reminder, we are recording this session. So if you want to take action with us after the session, we'll make sure that you get this recording. So once you open the app, you will be prompted to type in the campaign code again. So that's 209978. And then you'll pick your language preference. You'll enter your zip code and then your phone number. For those of you who are on computers, you can also join via the web app. You're going to head to the link that will drop in the chat box on your computer. And then on the web app, you'll click on the web link join and sign up with your email. Make sure that you're using an email that you have access to because you're going to get that magic link that's sent to your email account. However, if possible, we do recommend downloading the app to your phone so that you're able to easily navigate your social media accounts. So now that you're all set up on Impactive, either on your phone or the web app, we'll run through a short demo explaining how to take action using this tool. And I promise we're almost ready to take action. So our main goal for today is to learn how to utilize your preferred social media account to share information on how to avoid criminalization when self-managing an abortion. Social sharing on Impactive is one of the easiest and most effective ways to make an impact with USOW. You can amplify our messages from your own social media accounts to share to your followers. So let's learn how to share information on how to avoid criminalization when self-managing an abortion to our social media followers. And just so y'all know, the resource that we'll be sharing today is If When How's Repro Legal Helpline. Again, you can visit the helpline to get help with legal questions about your rights and risks regarding self-managed abortion and your rights and legal risks in supporting someone. So we want to make sure that we're spreading the word about this important helpline. So underneath Explore Actions, you'll see the different actions that you can take with us on Impactive. What you're going to do is click on the social sharing action, and it should say, help your community know their rights when self-managing an abortion. And then once you click on the action, you're going to select that little button down there that says copy, and then click start to ensure the message and link is fully populated. Impactive will allow you to share the message on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram direct messages. But make sure that you press copy first. It's an important first step so that you're accurately copying the exact text and link that you want to send out. So once you've clicked start, it will allow you to share the resource on Facebook, Twitter, and or email. It will ask you to log into your account, and then you'll be able to share your post. And don't worry, we're providing you with a pre-filled caption that has all the information you need to share. So if you have an Instagram account, we're going to use that as an example so you can follow along. So once you select the Instagram icon, Impactive will open your Instagram direct messages. And then all you're going to do is choose the person that you want to send the message to and paste the message in the write your message box. This will populate the message for you, and then you'll be able to share the message. And you can send this message to as many people as you can. So think about people who would benefit learning about this helpline. And these same rules apply if you want to post on Twitter, Facebook, or any other social media account. And then next, when you go back into the app, Impactive will ask you to confirm if you have completed the action, which you can click yes. And you can share it on other social media accounts if you feel comfortable. And that's pretty much it. So now that you're all set up on Impactive and have been trained on how to complete our social sharing action, it's time to reach out to our friends. So we encourage you to reach out to 3 of your friends. And remember, the more people that are aware that this resource exists, the more we can help our communities from criminalization of self-managed abortion. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here and wait for folks to reach out to their friends. Again, think about people who would benefit from this resource, or who, just it's helpful for them to know so that they can spread the word to other people as well. And I'm going to check the Q&A box. Maria, yes, we can definitely share the resources, the links that we shared. Awesome. Okay, I think those are all the questions. So we can go ahead and go on to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to go over some next steps and close. So make sure that you stay for these last couple of minutes as we close off. So our next steps for today are to encourage others to take action by signing up for Impactive and taking the action that we took today. So the more people that are sharing this out to their communities, the more we can help spread the word about this important resource. And there are additional actions that you can take in Impactive. So we encourage you to browse the app and take other actions that you see. And then stay tuned for our next event, which is called Campus Organizing for Abortion Access. So if you're a student, you'll want to attend, and that's going to be on August 9th. We'll go ahead and follow up with more information. I just want to say thank you so much for attending Self-Managed Abortion on Our Own Terms, Communities of Color and Criminalization. At USOW, we believe that everyone should be able to access the care they want and need safely and on their own timeline. We envision a world where people can access information about abortion, particularly self-managed abortion, without stigma or fear of criminalization. All people should be protected and empowered to make healthcare decisions that are best for them. People have always self-managed abortions, and regardless of the courts and politics, and will continue to do so with community care and generations of wisdom. We will keep fighting for freedom from stigma, criminalization, and barriers to abortion access. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a good night.